Audio now unmuted.
So while everyone's joining us, we're watching the live stream feeder cam from Cornell Lab of Ornithology in New York. I was telling people that were on earlier that I use this as a teaching tool a lot. I also just really enjoy watching it. The birds that you see here are going to be really the same species that we see in the Detroit area or throughout much of the Great Lakes. And so it's a great way, especially if you're teaching and you want your students to all be looking at the same thing. This is a great way to live stream birds. And this feeder is active from early in the morning until late in the evening. So, and they're getting really good birds. So not that there's a bad bird, but you get a lot of diversity at this feeder. So. And they have extremely cute bird feeders as well, as you see there, the penguin and raccoon. And I would also, while we're waiting for a few more people to join us, if you have any questions or something that you're really hoping to see or do or learn about today, whether you're a kid or an adult, we'd love to have that in the chat. And Sarah from Detroit Audubon will be facilitate the chat today.
All right, shall we get started?
I think so.
Okay, sorry, I have to move to another spot and now the sun is behind me. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and joining us today for our webinar, Family Fun at the Feeder. We are so excited to have you join us and to learn more about attracting feather friends to our backyard, bird feeders, and more from Belle Isle Nature Center's manager, Erin Parker. My name is Sarah Howson. I am the program coordinator for Detroit Audubon, an organization dedicated to fostering the appreciation and conservation of birds and the environment that we share. We could not do the work we do without our funders and members, so I wanted to thank those of you who are members and are supporting projects like these. And if you want to learn more about membership, please reach out to me. Some quick Zoom housekeeping before we begin today. You are able to control your video and microphone in the bottom left of your screen. We ask you keep yourself muted so that we don't receive feedback from your microphones. You can also open the chat box by clicking on the chat button on the bottom of your screen. We will have time for questions at the end of the presentation, so please add any questions you might have to the chat. And if you have other questions as well, please reach out to me. I'll do my best to assist you. And now I'd like to introduce Erin. Erin Parker grew up in Clarkston, Michigan, where her interest in the outdoors began. Following a winding path from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan to the Gulf Coast of Mississippi, Erin has been a high school science teacher, worked at nature centers in 3 states, and happily come full circle to be connecting Michigan residents to nature with the Detroit Zoological Society. Erin is the Belle Isle Nature Center's manager and also serves as the field conservation officer. Thank you and welcome, Erin.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for being here today. I see a lot of familiar faces from a lot of different parts of my life, so it's nice to have you all here. I think Sarah already said this, she is recording, so if that impacts how and when you use your camera, just think about that. And then if you have any questions, there's going to be lots of times where I'm going to ask you to put things in the chat. Don't send them as a direct message to me because when I'm presenting, it's really hard for me to see the chat. So send them either to Sarah directly or to everyone. And if you have a question or I say something that's confusing, don't hesitate to put it in the chat and I'll stop and go back. And I'm putting together a big list of resources, all the books that I reference, all the activities that I reference. So anything that you miss in my very quick overview of all these ways to engage with birds, whether you're a kid, a parent, a teacher, any of those things, you're gonna get Word document sent to you tomorrow, or I'm not sure when Sarah's sending it, but I'll have all those references and resources for you. So before I start with the slides and some of the projects and that kind of thing, I just want to draw your attention to the now empty bird feeders on your screen. This is Cornell Lab of Ornithology's feeder cam. It is live streamed basically 24 hours a day, although there's not much happening at the feeders in the dark. Up until this moment, they were really busy, and they're a great brain break if you're just looking to enjoy the birds and you don't have a bird feeder handy. If you are a teacher or you want to be doing an activity where you're streaming and all the kids are looking at the same birds, this can be a great tool. And there we go, we've got a little friend there. And then if you just want to practice your birds and practice some of the projects that we're going to talk about today, this can also be a great resource. And again, I'll put this link in the resources that you're going to receive at the end of the talk today. All right, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. If you have any questions up front, go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing, and I am going to start sharing my slides right here. You would think with all the days of Zoom, we would know all of this. And then I'm going to also exit here. All right, so is everybody seeing Family Fun at the Feeder?
Yes.
Great, okay. And Sarah, any questions or anything, any comments in the chat?
Not yet.
Awesome, all right, I'm gonna move on, and we're gonna have lots of ways to participate today. My slide, there we go. All right, so the first thing we wanna know is where are you joining us from? And we can put our city and state right in the chat box. And then I wanna know your second favorite bird to see at the bird feeder. Something to know about me is that I'm probably going to tell you a million times that whatever bird I'm showing you is my favorite bird. I have a lot of favorite birds. So I want to know your second favorite. And then Sarah, if you don't mind reading some of those.
Absolutely. So we have someone coming from Grosse Pointe Woods, red-breasted woodpecker, yellow finch, sparrow, hairy woodpeckers, cardinal, bluebird, some of my first and second favorites in here. A yellow shafted flicker, ruffed grouse.
That's a good one.
We have downy woodpecker, another cardinal, goldfinch. That's definitely up there. Downy woodpecker again. And we have people coming from all over too. Goldfinch again. Chickadee, definitely one of my favorites. And I hope we saw some of those in the feeder we were just watching as well.
You joined us early. There was a lot of activity at the feeder.
We got the northern oriole is listed. Right. That's Tom. Excellent. All right, thank you everybody. That was fun.
Yeah. That was awesome. And you can keep adding. I'm just going to move on because we have a packed agenda today. So super excited to have you all on. Anyone that knows me well knows that I love to talk about birding and birds with anyone that I meet. I do teach an adult birding class, like an intro to birding. It's 5 parts. But this is secretly my favorite thing, is teaching birds to kids. So the picture here is some students at the Belle Nature Center from 2019 when we could still do in-person things and we weren't thinking about masks and social distancing. And so we have a long history with a bird feeder there. And so they're practicing with binoculars. But the most important thing to know today is that you can be a birder if you're blind or deaf. You can be a birder even if you never use binoculars. You can be a birder if you never leave the house to go birding and you just look out your window and enjoy the birds. So we're really encouraging everyone, no matter where you're at with birding and understanding of birds and interest in birds, you're a birder. You don't have to be the characters in The Big Year with all the khaki clothing and huge cameras. You can just enjoy the birds at your backyard window. You don't even have to have a bird feeder up to be a birder. So what I hope today is to go through a lot of activities that you can do at home or at school that will help you use the birds that you're seeing in your backyard, in your park, wherever you're watching birds. And then lots of things that you can do to encourage birds to your backyard and to learn about them in different ways. We'll do a little bit of bird ID. I don't actually think it's that important for us to all know the names of birds, but sometimes we like to group them. Sometimes we like to make up our own names. And some people really do like to know the names of the birds. So we'll do a little bird ID. Then I'm going to leave you with a lot of resources and sort of the next steps that you can take to enjoy birds in your backyard or in your school or library or wherever you're thinking of using bird resources. So I do want to draw your attention to the little window clings. There's a couple of things happening at this window besides the students birding. So here are tiny little dots in a grid pattern, and that grid pattern happens to be 2 by 4 inches apart. And then there are these bigger window clings that are some birds that some students made for us. And so that is one of the ways that we protect birds at the Nature Center. We have all of our glass windows are bird friendly, which means the birds can see that there's something there and they don't fly into them. And that really helps us enjoy the birds without them crashing into our windows. And I'm not sure I have any more images of that, so I wanted to point it out right away. All right. So in the chat box, what are some ways? I just gave you one. I told you you could put something on the windows to make them noticeable. But I want to know, what are some ways that you can think of that we can help birds? And I can wait a moment for you to have time to type in the chat. And again, Sarah, this is probably a time where you'll have to read them out to me.
I'm ready. Give them fresh water, especially in winter. Bird bath, so everyone right on water. Plant native plants, leave them standing all winter.
Ooh, that's a really good one.
Good addition. Clean bird feeders, very important. Having bird feeders, but definitely keeping them clean. Bird houses, native plants, both for seeds and fruit, so there's different types of plants. Food in the winter, it's especially hard to find then, and varied seed if you are giving feed. So varied seed will give you different types of birds. Provide fruit. Okay. Keep cats indoors. Thank you, Tom.
Good one.
All right.
I thought these were great.
These are great. We have one, provide several venues to eat from, provide suet, so different types.
Suet. Okay, awesome. You guys, I don't even need to give my presentation. Really good. This bird here is one of our many extremely local, we have them everywhere. That's extremely abundant is the word I was looking for. This was taken last year at our bird window. A bird that's very happy to eat anything you put out, not very picky at all about its seed. And it happens to be on a grapevine, which is a native plant that provides some fruit. Although we noticed at the Nature Center, our foxes love to eat the dried grapes, the essentially raisins that the vines formed. I don't know if the birds got any, so, all right. And then next question. I promise not everything is going to be a question. I am going to talk about things in much more detail. But what are some ways that we can learn about birds? And I would love to have some of if we have students on or kids on, I'd love to hear what they think. What are some ways you would like to learn about birds? Parents and teachers, that does not mean you can't also put something in there.
Draw them.
Excellent.
Look at websites. Look
websites.
Them up online.
Yeah.
Observe their behavior.
That's a really good one.
Join birding clubs. Have feeders up in school windows.
Yes, definitely.
Birding ID books. Merlin app on your phone. Definitely a good one. Attend bird walks.
Yep, that's a great one.
Talk with other birders. Use field guides. Take notes, look them up, use binoculars.
Awesome.
Take walks, take nature walks, become a certified wildlife habitat through NWF. If you have a
Good one.
garden.
Yeah.
Join Audubon. Thank you.
Yep. Any of the Audubon groups. I liked the certified habitat because that's something that if you're associated with a school or a library, sorry, here, I'm going to go back. That is a great one. You can also do it in your own backyard if you have a backyard that has a little bit of space for those native plants and some of the other features that they're looking at. So, all right. Did we miss any?
Just watch them. Yep.
Just watch that. In all honesty, that is actually the best way. I was telling Sarah before anyone else joined that the way I've become a really good birder is just sitting at my kitchen table and watching the birds, or sitting at the nature center and watching the birds at my feeder. And you learn so much about them just watching them, and making a little bit of time in your day to just, what are they doing? What are they eating? You learn them as individuals. You learn them the behaviors that are common in the species. You watch the way they interact with each other. You watch the way the seasons change, because we do have some different birds here in the winter than we have during the spring and summer. So I think just watch them is kind of underpins everything else. So that's really seems like a simple suggestion, but it's really important. So,
and Jean also added to start conversation with birders.
Yes.
That's an excellent suggestion as well. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yes. So let's chat about bird feeders for just a moment, and then I promise we're going to get into the projects and the things that we can do to learn more about birds. So several of you mentioned that having different types of food and different types of feeders, sort of a diversity of things for birds to eat, is really important if you want a diverse group of birds at your backyard or park or garden. And that is totally true. So we have 3 different things happening here, and I'm going to tell you right now that I actually do not like this seed mix. So we've got tube style feeders, right? And I bet lots of you use these, and they're great. They have perches, there's nice openings for the birds. And this one is larger and the openings are larger. It's a little bit hard to tell that the one on the right with the yellow is a much smaller feeder with much smaller openings for the seeds. I don't like these mixes because I think the birds pick out the seeds that they don't like and throw them on the ground. If I had a choice, this bird feeder is at the nature center. We don't have a choice in the food that we get. It's just what's provided to us. This has, if it were my choice, I would just use black sunflower seeds because that's what the birds love to eat. You can get them hulled or you can get them with the hull or hullless. They do spit out the shells, the hulls, so that can make a mess. But with this seed, we go through so much of it and they throw a lot of it on the ground. Other thing is, we don't mind at the nature center having opossums and raccoons and all kinds of animals at the feeders on the ground eating the spilled seed. If you live in an urban place where your neighbors aren't as excited about animals as you are, you may not want all of those seeds on the ground. Totally your choice. There are a lot of birds that eat seeds off the ground, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But I just wanted to say that up front with this. This tube feeder has thistle seed, which is not a true thistle. It's Niger. It's a sunflower plant originally from Africa. They're teeny tiny little seeds. The finches love them. The problem with this is that these seeds seem to go rancid or get spoiled and stinky kind of fast, and the birds don't like them when they get rancid. So if it rains or we have a lot of snow and then it melts, that's often a time to check your finch feeders because the seed isn't as good, and you'll notice the birds just won't be consuming it. I'm going to talk about this one, and then we're going to talk about keeping the feeders clean and safe for birds, and then we'll move on to how, if we don't have bird feeders, what else can we do? So this feeder has suet in it, and the suet is not visible in this picture. And suet is often made of vegetable shortening or vegetable fats, and sometimes it has dried fruits and nuts in it. Originally, it came from beef, sort of rendered beef fat. So any of those things are fine. It's a huge source of fuel for birds in the wintertime. We don't usually put it up in the summer because it melts, so there's no point. But the cool thing about this feeder, someone said they really like seeing orioles in the spring, starting around April 15th, if you're in the Detroit area or similar latitude. You can fill this with orange slices and it becomes a great oriole feeder, and it keeps the squirrels from stealing your oranges. So with all of these, we want to keep them clean. So at the Nature Center, we take ours down every week. and wash them and sanitize them, but we have a bunch of feeders and a ton of birds. You want to make sure that there's not bird droppings and that kind of stuff on them, because that spreads disease to other birds. And the finches, unfortunately, are particularly susceptible to conjunctivitis, which is pink eye in humans. It can be fatal to birds. I will put it out there that if you capture a bird because it looks sick and its eyes are swollen and swollen shut, many of the bird rehabilitation centers around can actually treat the conjunctivitis, but you usually have to bring it to them. It's not something you can treat on your own. So you want to keep those feeders clean and sanitized so that you're not letting your birds spread diseases among each other. And then you also just keeping them filled is good. Keeping the seed, if it rains a lot and your seed gets soaked, it's probably better to get rid of that seed and start with fresh seed. So
Erin, we had a question.
Yeah.
What was the brand of that? Did you mention the brand of the suet feeder?
I didn't, but I have my my notes here. I will look it up when I send out the resources. I love that suet feeder. We have a bunch of them at the Nature Center, and they were so successful with the orioles, plus the woodpeckers love them. Let me write that down so I don't forget.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So what if you don't have a bird feeder? Well, there is the classic pine cone feeder that is easy to make and hang. You do want to be careful. You don't want to just smear peanut butter on a tree and let the birds, you don't want to get the oils into their feathers. So you want it to be in a place where the birds can land and keep their feet and feathers out of it and eat. So I put the recipe, 2 different recipes. You don't even need a recipe. You can make this up on your own. But I did put 2 different recipes for sort of make your own suet. One is just vegetable shortening and nut butter and seeds. So you see it's a 1-to-1 mixture of Crisco and sunflower butter, because that's what I had. I didn't even worry. So you can see there's clumps of the Crisco in it still. And then I rolled it in the seeds and I sprayed it on really thickly. That pine cone has a ton. Rolled it in the seeds, added my string and hung it up. You can also make a product called Marvel Meal that is these ingredients plus some flour and cornmeal. And that makes more like a dough. It's a little bit easier to work with. You could put it in a suet feeder because there's a little more substance to it. Either one is easy. You can almost always have some of this stuff at home. And it's a fun way to get some birds, maybe right outside your window or in your backyard. All right, so let's start by talking about some of our local winter birds. And birding in the winter is especially great because you're starting with fewer and you're probably seeing them a lot. The leaves are gone, they're active at the feeders, your sight lines are clear, most of us are still at home a lot. So you're able to see these birds a lot better. And I always think it's such a great, you get 3 or 4 months of winter birds before all those spring arrivals start happening. So you feel really confident about your birds. And then you can start adding to your list of birds that you know. So first of all, in the chat, let's hear not what they are, and definitely not by name. What do these birds have in common? So look at them, think about them, and then let's hear what you think they have in common. And I do this suet feeder, here's a different style suet feeder. These birds love suet. Other birds will definitely come to suet, but if you want these birds to come to your backyard and to be able to see them, the suet is the thing. All right, Sarah, I can see the chat numbers going up. What do we have?
We have a lot of people talking about woodpeckers.
Woodpeckers, all right. So you guys knew that. So what told you that was a woodpecker? What are the things that we see there, or maybe when we're outdoors we hear that tell us that they're woodpeckers? Because you are right, these are all in the woodpecker family.
So we have a couple people talking about their beaks, long beaks.
Long, strong bills, excellent. Because what do woodpeckers do with them when they're not eating suet, which is fairly soft?
No one else? Stabbies.
Yeah, so they are looking for all kinds of insects in under the bark of trees. So this time of year, they'll be doing that and we hear them, right? Each type of woodpecker has a different pattern and sound quality, I guess, of their tapping. And so often it carries a long distance in the winter, so you can hear the woodpeckers long before you see them. What else do you notice? We noticed the long bills. What else told you these were woodpeckers? Because I think there's one other thing that helps me.
Someone else mentioned that they use their tails as props.
Yeah, so their posture and the way they use their tails is pretty unique. So that's good. So they've got these long tails. And a lot of times if you look at them, this bird is a little bit of an exception, but they're often they're straight up and down. There's very vertical in shape. I thought there was something else that you all would say, but that was a good observation.
We have a few people talking about the colors.
Color, okay. Color and pattern, I think, often tell us. So we could be in California and maybe none of these birds are visible, but we're going to see a black and red and white bird and probably know that it is a woodpecker, which is pretty cool. So let's talk about, okay. Now I want you to look at this picture. This is the male and female of the same species, and the male is very slightly out of focus, and I apologize for that. But something else that we can start to look for is, what is the difference between these two birds? What is the thing that you might see?
All right, Emily said red.
Okay, so either the presence of red or the amount of red is often something that we can use, even if we don't have binoculars, even if it's just a bird that's bopping around in a tree right outside the window, we can start to see the red is going to be visible on the male. And some species, the female has a little bit of red and the male has a lot of red. So that when you see that red, that can help us start to think about which bird it is. And then what I like to do is see, is there just one bird? Because that's one way I can tell them apart, right? So if this bird comes to the suet and then a minute later it's gone, but a bird that looks just the same except it doesn't have any red, that can help me learn a little bit more about the pairs of birds at my feeder. All right. And so in our bird guides or online, we would look at the woodpecker family. This is a very small bird. This is probably our most common it's probably our most common woodpecker, not just in the winter. Teeny tiny little beak. It's probably using, pulling things out under the bark with that beak when it's not eating seeds or suet. Small beak, kind of small bird. This is our downy woodpecker. Again, you can call it whatever you want. I think it's really important to say you're not a birder. That's an awkward sentence, but you're not a birder if you don't know the birds' names. It is totally fine to enjoy them and make up your own names for them if that is the way you enjoy birds. So I think sometimes with kids, we forget that it's pretty fun to just look at the birds and make observations. And as adults, we feel like, well, I don't know what that's called. How am I going to help my student or child? It's okay. You can definitely say, I don't know, and we'll look it up together, or you can agree to call it whatever you want to call it. So, all right. So let's talk about a couple of projects that we can do to start to learn our birds, but also to sort of play around with birds in a bunch of different ways. And so the first project suggestion, and we're going to go through, I think, 8 different projects today in just quick overviews, just to give you an idea and maybe spark some creativity in the kids that are on and things that you want to do. And I'll put resources for anything that isn't as simple as this in that resource that you're going to get at the when she sends out the resources with the webinar. Just use these as a jumping off point. These are just suggestions. And I have a bunch of books towards the end that kind of link to all of these. So there's lots of ways to look outside, enjoy those birds, listen to the birds when you're outdoors, and then maybe come in and do a bunch of different projects and learn about birds in different ways. So bird art is a great way to learn about birds, not just as an art form, but also to start thinking about shape and size and color. So I made a very quick cardinal today. And when I was making it, I was trying to think about shapes. So I pulled up an image of the cardinal, even though I have a mental image of the cardinal. I wanted to see what it looked like if I thought about it in shape. So I've got some triangles, I've got this sort of oval shape, and then the bird itself is kind of elongated. which is different from some other birds. So it helps us pay attention to those field marks. It helps us pay attention to those shapes. And it ends up being I thought it was a really fun activity to do, to sort of, how do I make a recognizable bird in a very simplistic way? So, and Sarah, feel free, if there's stuff in the chat that you want to say, feel free.
Yeah, I wanted to add, Nettie said like a Charlie Harper.
Like a Charlie Harper. And Charlie Harper, for those of you that don't know, is just a phenomenal artist, unfortunately no longer alive, who spent much of his career doing wildlife. He has a very unique and I think amazing art style. And he focused a lot on wildlife. So I did not make these. My amazingly talented coworker did. So if you want to get a little bit fancier, you could use felt because it doesn't fray. So, or fabric. You might need to do something about the edges. Maybe you like the rough edges, and that's fine. So she made these two birds. It's a very similar concept. They're just a neater, tidier, finished product. And I also realized she sewed them, and she will happily admit that she sewed them while on a 3-hour statistics class webinar. So she sewed them, but you could also use some kind of fabric glue if you didn't want to use the needle and thread. So I thought these were amazing. I asked her if I could use them and give her credit in this workshop today. So lots of ways that we can think about art and depicting birds. And what we're doing at the same time is really learning some of those field markings, because this bird is probably really obvious to all of you on here. You've seen this bird before with its black cap and the white cheek and the gray wing. And so it's really thinking about birds in a slightly different way and making them down to their most basic parts. But those are also training your eye to see the birds out in the woods or at your feeder as well. Okay, so this is another group of birds. And so first, before you put in the chat what group they are, let's talk about them, because these are often birds that people are not that excited about. And I've got a couple slides worth of them because I think they're incredible. And the more time you spend watching birds at your feeder, the more you'll get to know them and their behaviors and their personalities and sort of how different they are. So is there anything that you notice about these birds that they all have in common? You can put that in the chat. And again, those of you from the Belle Isle area, these two are from our feeder there. This one, I think I actually just took off the internet, which is ridiculous because I see these birds every day, but did not have any pictures of them.
All right, so we have people talking about the bills, the cone-shaped bills.
Cone or triangle, but it's like a thick triangle. Excellent, good.
Brown and gray markings. Short beaks.
Yep.
It's someone that did write the name.
Okay.
Let's see if there are any other descriptive words.
I like the beak or the bill. And I know that's hard to see a lot of the times when we're watching birds because they're moving around so quickly. But yes, a short, kind of stubby, conical beak. They're often feeding, they're often feeding on the ground. These two up here will be on the ground or your feeder or in a big box store if you're outdoors. I mean, if you head inside to get something, these birds are everywhere. All right.
The technical little brown guys term.
Yes, little brown guys, little brown jobs. So lots of people that watch birds don't try to distinguish these. I do want to call your attention to this one because it looks a little bit different and they're really common right now and you often see them on the ground. And when these fly, they have these beautiful white outer wing or outer tail feathers. So you'll see them and their tail will fan out and the white on either side is really helpful, even at a distance or even in low light. So, and this one also happens to be the male. So he is much darker, much more solid colored. The females, actually there's a lot of variability in this particular species, but the females tend to be paler, sort of paler gray with a little bit of a black cap. And this bird, so we think about migration, we think about birds leaving, right? They leave Michigan and Wisconsin and wherever we're living, and they go south for the winter. They're looking for food and water sources. Well, at the same time, some birds, like both of these, come down to Michigan and spend the winter with us. And so when this bird arrives, and at my house, it was October 15th or October 17th, I meant to check, I wrote it down this year and I didn't check before I came to work today. When these birds arrive, I know it's winter, even if it's still beautiful out and it doesn't have the cold, dark feeling that winter does. So this is our dark-eyed junco, and this is a neat one. This one also just spends the winter with us, and I like its red cap. It's got this little black sort of heart-shaped spot on it. And it's a beautiful sparrow that loves to kind of flip leaves around, and you'll often find it on the ground. If you have a field near you, this is a place where you can find these. And someone at the beginning said something that's really good for birds is to leave native plants standing all winter. And this is a bird that loves that. They'll eat the seeds off your flowers from last year. They like to be in fields where there's plant material still standing. And this is our American tree sparrow. And so the other thing is, it's kind of fun to pay attention to these in the spring and try to figure out the last day you see one of these, because they'll start leaving. They overlap with some of our spring migrants, but when they start leaving, it's just sort of a fun piece of phenology to notice. And so those events that take place over the year. So these are birds. Here's a couple more. Got a beautiful song sparrow here. It's got kind of a mustache hanging down or a beard hanging down. And this white-throated sparrow, so you want to look for that throat patch. And I think this would be a beautiful one to do in paper, because it's got these neat black and white stripes and a little yellow mark over the bill, and then this white throat patch. You could give it brown wings. So there's some field marks there that are pretty characteristic. If you want sparrows at your feeder, you don't have to do very much. They're pretty good at finding seed. But one thing is, if your seeds are spilling on the ground, these birds will come and help you clean up. You could also put a little bit of millet or some of the other seeds on the ground for them. This is a pretty sparrow, and this is the one that has a beautiful song. You won't hear it this time of year, but you'll start hearing it in another month or two. And it says, "Oh, sweet Canada, Canada, Canada." And that's a fun sort of harbinger of spring at our feeders. And so I'm hoping that you're seeing that sparrows have a lot of virtues, and you don't have to learn them by name and you don't have to learn them by species, but they're really fun to watch. They're really active birds, and they're really common at our feeders. So, so it can be fun to sort of learn them a little bit and learn their behaviors. All right, I've got a couple of math projects here, and I want to share a couple of tips and tricks. And this is especially for the kids that are on. This one's super fun. You can watch your birds out your window, and with your parent or guardian or teacher's permission, you can write right on your window. And so this picture's a little bit hard to see, but what I've done is print off some pictures of the birds that are at our feeder, and I stuck them on the window. And then what's hard to see is that there's actually some graphing lines there, and the kids are tallying the birds. So they're counting all of the birds that they see and putting them right on the window, sort of as a graph or a chart. And that can be a really fun way to add something to watching the birds out the window. So here I put Sharpie marker with 2 asterisks. And so I used Sharpie marker to make my grid lines on the window because it will come off with a little vinegar and water. But I would test it first and sure. And then what I have the kids using are poster markers, because I had a bunch of kids coming through that day. And so if they found 10, I think I've got tufted titmice up here. If they found 10 titmice, I wanted to be able to erase their tally without erasing the Sharpie marker lines, just to make my own life easier. So I have a couple of other options for these that I will share in the resources. There's some great window clings that I use there's 30 of them, and they're common birds. But just so you know, I'm not recommending you buy anything in particular to do this. You could make this as simple as you want. You could write the names of the birds at the top of your chart. But it's a great way to build in some math skills. But those window clings are great, but they're teeny tiny. So just know that if you want them to take up a bunch of space on your window to do this graphing activity, the window clings is not the way to go. So we can do some other types of graphing. So depending on how old your kiddos are, or students that are on here, you can, here's the window clings on the picture on the left in that slightly sloppy pie chart. So you can sort birds, you can tally birds. If you're working on fractions, you can do a pie chart like this, and then, you know, a cardinal is 1/8 of the birds that you saw. So lots of ways to just utilize the birds that you're seeing in different ways and to build in those math skills. And parents, I would encourage you to not be afraid of math or the word math, because a lot of times our students are really excited to do these activities and they're building their math literacy. And we don't even have to say the word math. They're sorting and counting and tallying, all sorts of things that are really valuable math skills that are great for them to practice at home, especially if you've already engaged them with the birds at your window. And again, you don't need any supplies besides a writing utensil and paper. Your students could draw the birds. You could use the paper birds that you've made. You can use something like these window clings. You know, there's lots of ways to do this. With younger kiddos, when I do birding things with preschoolers, I use little figures, anything that's manipulative. So there's lots and lots and lots of options. Again, I'm just giving you suggestions and a brief overview. I will leave everyone with my email address at the end. So if you have specific questions or want to brainstorm a little bit more, I'm happy to do that. This really is my favorite thing to teach. So, all right. Sarah, any questions or comments, or if other—
We did have a question about other than sparrows, cardinals, blue jays, and robins, can you tell us the next 5 most common birds in yards? I don't know if you were going to go back to some of the other.
I have more birds built in. And then if I don't answer that enough, let me know at the end when we sort of have a little bit of time for questions, and there's probably 10 or 15 that most people in the Great Lakes can get at their feeders. And we'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. So make sure to remind me if I don't come back to that for you.
Okay, will do.
Okay. Speaking of, so these are a little bit trickier, partly because the picture on the left is not in great lighting and this bird doesn't have spectacular color in the winter months. So think about the birds we looked at just a moment ago. In fact, I'll go back to them. So we had these birds, and you really keyed in on the bills, which was good. So we're gonna look at some very similar birds, and I'm gonna tell you right now, I taught my beginning birding class on Sunday to adults, and my husband has a PhD in ornithology, and he was helping just man the chat for me while I was doing this. And he said, until you pointed out some of these things, he said, I just overlooked them. I wasn't really aware of how you tell these apart. These are tricky birds and they're everywhere, so we tend to overlook them. So if you can notice some things, make some observations about things for how we might recognize this group of birds and how they might be a little bit different than that sparrow group that we looked at before. And I can tell you, like many birds, the male has more bright colors. The female has less color. That's good. She's got a really important job to do in the spring and summer. When she lays eggs, she's got to keep those eggs warm and safe, and then the babies, and she's got to hide from predators. And so if she had all these bright colors, it would be a little bit challenging for her to hide from predators. So I think she's got some beautiful stripes. There's a lot going on that I think we tend to overlook. So does anybody have any observations about what might make this group of birds, how we recognize them? This is a tough one. These are probably this is probably the toughest group with these examples.
We do have smaller, more pointed bills.
Pointy. That pointy bill is helpful. And again, if we don't often get so close to them that we can see that, but that's a good observation from this picture.
Seed eaters, a large beak.
Okay, sort of compared to their head. And there's a lot of these. These are our house finches. And I just want to show you that they're often found really closely in similar flocks or near flocks of house sparrows. And so the thing that I was pointing out to my class on Sunday was, if you notice all these little streaks and stripes, that is usually your female house finch. You could also have pine siskins who are also stripy, but they look a little bit different. The female house sparrow looks a lot like her, but she's got a much cleaner front. She doesn't have all these little stripes. So you just learned a very advanced observation there. And then this one will start to get, the males will start to get bright yellow, kind of like this, later in the season. That is our American goldfinch. So they do like this Niger seed, the littler seed. House finches aren't as picky. They're on all of my feeders, including they'll eat suet too. So, but good, that's a good observation about the pointy bill. And they are seed eaters. And we've got some cool winter finches that are coming down and visiting us this year. It's an eruption year, which just means some of our birds that are usually much further north are coming down, and you might get them at your feeder. So that's kind of something to look out for, that they're might be bigger and more colorful, and that they're making people very, very excited this year. All right, couple more. This is not a group of birds. I wanted to talk about these tufts of feathers. And so we can put in the chat, we probably know both of these. This bird right here is probably my favorite bird everywhere I go, they come out of the woods. They're so curious and interested. And I think its coloration is beautiful. So do you want to put in the chat if we know these? And if not, we can.
Netta got it. We've got tufted titmouse.
Tufted titmouse, yeah. So it's like a little ball of a bird with usually a crest. And then we've got our beautiful male northern cardinal. These are also taken at the bird window. You can see all that grapevine. So we have a lot of native plants back there. The thing I want to mention is that sometimes we use field marks like color or the crest. And color can be good, but if it's a cloudy day or if the bird is up in a tree, color isn't always as useful. So one thing that we can start to do is train our eyes to see those patterns, sort of the way we did when I showed you the paper bird or the felt bird. Can you break that bird down into components that trains your eye to look for certain things? Now, the trick about the crest is that the bird, that's feathers, and so the bird can control that with their scalp muscles, and I think jaw muscles as well. And so that crest is not always up. And so don't let that trick you. Blue jays have a crest, cardinals have a crest, tufted titmice have a crest. But sometimes if it's really windy or if it's rainy, that crest will be down or flat and it'll throw you off. So you don't want to rely on one characteristic usually when you're learning your birds. And you can see that giant seed cracking bill there. If you want these birds at your feeder, they love black oil seed or sunflower seeds, and the tufted titmouse comes to suet all the time as well. It's a pretty curious bird. It seems to come to just about anything. Then we've got these two, and I wanted to throw these in because they're calling a lot. So if you go out in it's twilight or getting dark, even if you live in a big city, you're going to hear one or both of these birds, probably not at the same time, because this one is much smaller than this one. Because there's something super cool going on right now, which is that these birds, even though it's wintertime, are starting to set up their territories and they're getting ready to nest, and they will be on eggs even in Michigan and Wisconsin in the next couple of like 3 or 4 weeks. And so these big birds, including things like our eagles, will start nesting a little bit later, but not too much later. These birds are calling, they're finding mates. They're really common even in big urban areas. And so we forget that we think of owls as being sort of mysterious and needing wilderness, but they'll nest in your backyard. And so this is a big owl with a booming call. And this is a tiny owl, a pretty small, not our smallest owl, but our small common owl. And they're both calling right now. I've heard them both in the last 6 weeks probably. But what I wanted to draw your attention to, not just that they're just to listen for them, and find places where they're setting up nests and territories, is these, we call them ears or horns. So this is our great horned owl. And that is not a good name because they are neither ears nor horns. They are feather tufts. And those feather tufts can go back as well. So The bird's ear is actually internal. It's just an opening, not describing it very well. It does not have an outer ear the way we do. And these tufts maybe make the owl look bigger and scarier, so nothing wants to eat it, and maybe helps with directionality of sound and getting sound into those ears. If you are flying around at night, as these owls are, looking and listening for mice and rats and small things to eat, you need really, really good hearing. So I just wanted to call attention. These aren't exactly bird feeder birds, but they're using our backyards and our houses in our cities and our big oak trees and things like that in our parks this time of year at night. And they're fun to hear and see. So listen for those when you're outside in the evening. Plus, I always like it to encourage people to go outside in the evening. Winter can feel really long and really dark, and this is a nice way to celebrate a little bit of that, is to go on a twilight walk and listen for the things that are out and about while we're usually inside thinking that it's midnight and it's really only 5:30. Okay, I'll talk about 2 citizen science projects, and I'm trying to be really cognizant of the time here. I'm going to send you the links for these, so don't feel like you need to know all of this. Citizen science is a way for us to, especially for kids, to participate in science projects. And this science through, again, this is all through Cornell, is used, and actually we mentioned Charlie Harper earlier. Here's some Charlie Harper art in the background. Citizen science is a way for just regular everyday people to follow a protocol and participate in science. And the great thing about the backyard bird count, which always happens the second week in February, it's a 4-day weekend, is that it's free. You can tally birds in your backyard. You don't need a feeder. You can just anywhere that you can watch birds for a couple of days and count them up and submit them. And what's neat about this is you might not have that many birds in your backyard over this period, but it looks at birds across the country and across the continent at the same time. And so that data becomes really important because you have contributed your birds and Sarah's contributed her birds and people in other states have contributed their birds. And so it gives scientists a huge set of data that's always taken in the same weekend over a long period of time and across a lot of states and provinces. And so it's really important. It's really easy to participate. And it's free. You just have to register so that you can submit your data. And it's fun if you're already watching birds, and it can add something because there's some protocols that you follow and there's lots of resources for you. But it's a really great way to participate in science if you're already watching the birds. The second one, I love this project. This is Project Feeder Watch. It's a sort of like the Great Backyard Bird Count, except it happens over several months. So it starts in November. It used to end in February. They've extended it through April, thanks to the pandemic. We're all home watching our birds. You sign up and register. You submit data. You can submit photos if you take good photos. There's a ton of resources online. There's pictures. You can click. This is an interactive feature on their website. You can click on all of these and learn about them, learn what they like to eat, learn their songs. The only thing about this one is there is a small fee attached to it. It's the only citizen science project that I know of that has a fee. I think it's $18 a year. It also contributes to a big pool of data. This one, I would never tell people to buy something. I do happen to love this project so much. I sign up for it every year. I enjoy their website. If you don't sign up for it, most of the data is still accessible. So if you want to look at the website and see all the resources, you can still do that and you'll still learn a ton about birds. So I highly recommend it if you want to spend a little bit of money to do a citizen science project. The first year you sign up, you also get a poster, which is right here, of all the common feeder birds, which I find is a super useful tool as you're getting started. All right, a couple more Know Your Birds. I love these because they're similar enough, but if I think about them in my paper bird form, you notice a couple of different things. So this one is mostly blue. It's got this pale gray white chest here, tiny sharp beak. And this one is turned away just a little bit. The bill is a little bit harder to see. So this one is also often upside down, which you don't even have to see the bird. You can just sort of see its silhouette or shape, and you will know right away what this one is. So we can put that in the chat. You can put either one. And I will say there's a lot of birds in this group of birds that look very, very, very similar. This is our Michigan version. Sarah, do we have
All right. Yes, we have white-breasted nuthatch on the
white-breasted nuthatch, good.
And the black cap chickadee.
Chickadee, good. I think I have, oh yeah. I wanted to put this one in at the last minute because there's so many of them this year. So this is very similar. I'm going to go back. So here's our, my mouse. There's our white-breasted nuthatch. So notice it has a black sort of partial cap, slightly gray face, but pretty unmarked. And then this is pale, barely gray. Now this bird, and this is probably a female, is really pale here. Should have put the male. The male is quite dark orange in here. This, see how that she's got a stripe through her eye. This is our red-breasted nuthatch. And there's a ton of them this year down in our latitude. And they are so much fun to watch. They're really active. They're really tiny. They're smaller even than this bird. So keep your eye out for that and look for, it's got a white face and a black head, blue back. And then this one has that eye stripe or eye line. And just this, the females has this pale orange or pale red, and then the male has a much darker orange. Then this one is, I put these in because it was common. They're not grouped particularly well for any particular reason. This is a bird, you often see them in groups, feeding on the ground. It's makes noise when it flies, so you often hear them before you see them. You can throw that in the chat if you know what that one is. You often see them on the power lines as you're driving as well, that long tail.
We've got it, the mourning dove.
Mourning dove. And just for those of you that are hearing that, it's mourning as in sadness. And when you hear them call, they're not really doing a lot of calling this time of year, but in the early spring they'll start. It sort of sounds sad. And sometimes people think they're owls. It has just a sort of soft, sad coo. All right. I'm going to send you in the resources all of these books. It's really important to me that we are constantly looking for books for kids about birds and nature that have a lot of diverse characters and a lot of diverse perspectives. And I had to really limit what I stuck in this slideshow. So this is just a taste of them. Ruby's Birds is a wonderful book. She goes birding in Central Park and gets to see a really neat migrating warbler. So this is a great spring book. The birds in it are real, and there's information at the end of it about those birds, which is pretty fun. So lots of ways to use this book, talking about migration, talking about birds, talking about sort of that amazing time in spring when all of our birds reappear. Birdsong just came out, I think in 2020, and it is a Cree or indigenous story, and it's not entirely about birds, but the child character in it is making these beautiful illustrations and journals, and so it's just a really wonderful perspective, and she sort of follows the seasons and the birds and the plants and the animals. So it's a beautifully illustrated book as well. If you're going to do nature journaling, if your kids are into nature journaling, or if the students on here are into nature journaling, this would be a really neat piece to add to that. We've got some classics. If you're doing bird beak adaptations or any kind of adaptations, we've got beaks and paddle perch climb. Bird feet are neat. So different ways that birds have adapted to their lifestyles and how those adaptations help them survive. Again, the illustrations are wonderful in both of these. I like the black rat snake up there. And so there's always an art component, I think, if you want to use some of these books. If you want to do some of the citizen science projects, these two books are fabulous. So we've got Bird Count and Counting Birds, the idea that helps save our feathered friends. These tie specifically to the Christmas bird count and kind of the history of it, but they're great if you want to do Project Feeder Watch or the Great Backyard Bird Count as well. I will say this one's slightly more text heavy, the Counting Birds. Bird count is this bird count is pretty straightforward. Again, I like the art as much as I like the text. So, and then if you're thinking about bird life cycles, two blue jays nesting are both sort of about following a bird through the year, or a bird family through the year, and the parents and the young and the fledglings. The art in here in nesting is really neat. It's all pencil drawings except for the eggs in their bright blue robin colors. And then have you heard the nesting bird? If you're trying to learn bird songs, this book is great because it has images and their calls. And a lot of times we use a mnemonic or memory device to learn their calls, and that they're written out in here in a really neat way. I got all of these from the library. So if you're local, I have them all right now. But if you're not local, I always advocate for utilizing your library. And if you're a teacher, I'm going to share out some grant resources because I think a lot of these would make a really neat curriculum module, and you could get those books with a grant, or a parent that wants to help a school library. All right, our last project I think that I have in here is a citizen science project, but it really connects to social studies and mapping and geography, and thinking about the connections between where birds are when they visit us and where they go, doing lots of mapping. So Journey North is a wonderful website. It has all kinds of projects that you can participate in. So you can just, if you're watching birds anyway and you want to put in the date when you see your first robin return, if you're around here, that's not going to work this year because our robins have not left. They're short distance migrants, and this year they're just hanging out. There are many ways that you can connect this to maps and geography. So, okay, tips for grown-ups. You don't have to know the answer. If you don't know your birds, that does not mean you can't do a birding unit. Celebrate birds with your kids, watch birds with your kids, learn about birds with your kids. Birds can really be the gateway to all kinds of learning, to exploring, to discovery, to play, to getting outside, to getting away from screens. Thank you for being on the screen tonight with me. And as adults, there are just so many resources to help you. There are local birding clubs, there are field trips. Many of our local birding groups are having field trips, and they're almost always free, and they're almost always, anyone is allowed to join and participate. The Cornell Lab is a resource. It's just, there's so many resources at Cornell that it's hard to even describe them. That's where the feeder cam came from. That's where Feeder Watch and some of our citizen science, if any of you adults are e-birders, that's sort of under their umbrella as well. Okay, I think it is 5:01, so you have, I made it almost to the minute, but I have plenty of time for questions. This photo I took last year cracks me up every time I see it. That's not what I was aiming for, so I'm delighted that it happened. And I think, so my email address is there, eparker@dzs.org. You will be getting a copy of the webinar. I'm going to stick around for questions and comments, and I'm going to stop sharing. It always feels like teaching in, oh, good question. After cleaning the feeders, I use a mixture of like a gallon or two of water, depending, I guess it's actually a 5-gallon bucket, and a couple tablespoons of Simple Green. I want to do something that is going to sanitize it because I'm trying to get rid of the any kind of bacteria or anything that the birds could spread. That is a great question. Sarah, were there?
Yes. Yeah, we did have a couple people ask earlier about cleaning and sanitizing. So thank you. We did have someone ask directly if there were any resources that you could recommend to learn more about the finch conjunctivitis.
Yeah, so honestly, if you, let me write myself a note and I'll send you a link, but you could, I'm trying to do too many things at once. This is a little bit self-serving. I'm teaching a free bird watching class. I'm just going to put the link in there. You've missed the first one. I'm happy to send it to you. But if you as an adult are a beginning birder, you are so welcome to join me. Okay, great question. So Vicky's saying this spring with social distancing, will there be bird watching trips? So yes, almost all the bird organizations are doing something. If you're familiar with the world's biggest week in birding at McGee Marsh and that area of Ohio, which for us Detroit residents is both very close and extremely appealing during migration, they have already decided that they are doing that virtually. They're not going to host all those field trips, but that is a special case because thousands of people cram onto those little boardwalks at a time. So I'm gonna put, Kathleen, I'm not sure, Kat, I'm not sure what there's information. Oh, there's information about conjunctivitis on Project Feeder Watch is what Kat's saying. And there's some great pictures in there as well, so you know what to look for. I've seen it at both my home feeder and the nature center feeder. So unfortunately, it's fairly common, and house finches are most likely to get it, but they'll spread it to other things. And the issue is it's really easy to spread and it's really hard to get rid of. So let me write this
And
down.
I was going to say, as far as for Detroit Audubon, we are doing birding field trips. They're very limited capacity. We're trying to do as many as we can. At this time, members of Detroit Audubon chapter are the first people able to register for them. So they do keep filling up. So become a member. It's $30 for the year to become a member. Unfortunately, that's just the way that we have it set right now, but we're getting a lot of great new members, and these webinars have been great. So we really are trying to add more and add maybe multiple times for each one. So if you are not getting that, you will be getting emails now that you have registered for this. You'll be getting emails that will tell you more about that. But as Erin said, that she's working with some groups that are doing limited. So there are definitely people doing them.
And I would say it's important to, virtual Bird Fest, Wings Over Water Birding Festival. Oh, great.
Fantastic.
Send that, and I'll bring that up with my adult birders for sure. That's really helpful to know. So I know I have someone from California participating in my beginning birding class, and I don't know what birds are common in Pasadena right now. So anything West Coast is helpful. So
all right, I think I had a couple other.
I also wanted to say, thanks, Carrie. I also wanted to say that there are a lot of youth organizations doing lots of stuff for birds. So Wisconsin has a Young Birders Club. Michigan has several. There's also a Michigan Young Birders Network that just started. So there are lots of ways to get kids involved in birding. And it's a great way for them to take on leadership roles. Kat Doherty's on from Oakland Audubon, and she oversees the Oakland Owlettes. So if you're local, that is an option. Wisconsin Society of Ornithology has a youth birding club, and that it's growing, especially in the last couple of years as people stayed home these last 9 months and really paid attention to their birds. So lots of ways for you and your children or your students to get involved. And there's often scholarships for camp and things like that. Audubon in a normal year runs a wonderful camp at Hog Island out on the East Coast for kids. So lots and lots and lots of ways for kids to get involved and really to support them in their interest in birds. So.
And I should add, Detroit Audubon does have a monthly Young Birders Walk at Palmer Park for 12 to 18-year-olds. So if anyone wants to know more about that, let me know. I think we did have let's see. Someone did ask about what birds are attracted to suet feeders. And then we were also, just to go back to the question of the 5 most common birds in yards in Michigan, if we missed any, but I think you did cover.
Okay, I think we covered most of them. There's other great birders on who could throw them in the chat if you're thinking of it. Oh, Kat, I noticed while you're on, is there going to be any project Flying Wild trainings anytime soon? That is a great project for teachers. So if you're not familiar with Flying Wild, I know everything's been on pause. That's a great bird-related project aimed at middle school teachers. So suet feeders. So suet feeders are great for all of those woodpeckers. I've got flickers on mine. I've got downy and hairy woodpeckers. I've got red-bellied woodpeckers. But I also, the titmice and the chickadees and the sparrows will all come to suet. And suet is popular when it is out because it's easy to digest and it's fuel. So even even the homemade stuff is really attractive to the birds. So I think we covered most of the common ones. Nuthatches, finches,
So,
sparrows, cardinal, titmice, woodpeckers. You might be getting some blackbirds. I've got a few starlings. In another month, maybe not even, we'll start getting our red-winged blackbirds at the feeder, and then the grackles will follow, and then the brown-headed cowbirds. Yeah, okay. Someone just, as I'm saying it, you're typing it. So yes, those, I don't have as many of those this time of year, but in the next, I don't know, I am trying to think about what the day is today, the 14th. Yeah, in the next couple of weeks, I would not be surprised to have red-winged blackbirds, and then those flocks get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. So yeah. Yes. And Kat is saying that all those birds are available. Oh, good point. That Project Feeder Watch poster is free online, and you can just download it and print it yourself. I totally forgot that. I will put that in the resource list for people, because it's, I don't know how I forgot that. I gave it to my niece and nephews to use because I think it's so handy. It's Project Feeder Watch is just a wonderful resource, even if you choose not to. Yeah, so I see the question about the sunflower seeds without hulls. So I lived in Royal Oak, and we had rats, and all of us in Royal Oak had rats. So we were trying to reduce our seed waste as much as possible. And yes, if I were concerned about what other non-birds were coming to my feeder at night, especially under the feeder itself, I would try the hull-less sunflowers and probably just that, and suet for a while and see if that helped. It depends on what animals you're trying to dissuade. Theoretically, it dissuades some of the starlings and grackles. I haven't really noticed a difference when I just feed plain black oil seed, and the hull-less ones don't have the shell mess to clean up. So yes, it should help. I don't think there's a perfect solution. But that's a great question that a lot of us are dealing with, particularly in urban areas. So, and those of us in Michigan, the DNR really does not want us to leave seeds on the ground, because they don't want feeding places for deer where the deer are mingling. That's a tough one, because I don't want to take my seed feeders down. I also don't want to spread chronic wasting disease. So yeah, so Donna is wonderful. I have not actually met Donna in person, but I'm glad she's here. She had agreed via another mutual friend to help us with my birding class last year, and then the pandemic hit and we did not get to do our outdoor field component. But I just reiterating that you can be a birder and be visually impaired, and lead hikes and learn your birds and teach your birds. So thank you for that, Kat. It's very helpful to have you on. If you don't know Kat Doherty, she's an amazing retired naturalist and super volunteer with the young birders at the Oakland Audubon Society. So
great.
awesome.
That was all the questions that I had from further up on the chat. Thank you so much.
I appreciate everybody's time today. Feel free to reach out. I can put my email in the chat again if you have questions. And be looking for the webinar and the resources that we talked about. I don't know, Sarah, when you're going to send it.
Yes, I mean, I will send that out most likely tomorrow, if not early next week. I'll send out a recording of the webinar and the resources, and you can always follow up with either of us with any questions. And thank you so much for spending the afternoon, early evening with us. And I learned so much, Erin. I always love working with you, so thank you. And like I said, we have a schedule of webinars coming up. We have we have one next week on Elmwood. That is history and birds of Elmwood, which will be really fun. And Roseanne Kowalczyk, actually, I forgot to mention, she piped in Facebook that she said that the suet feeder was donated by her through Wild Birds Unlimited. So
that's what I was like, I think this is Wild Birds Unlimited. Yes. And I'm pretty sure she's connected to it, so I'm glad.
Yes. And so she and Joni Capuano, who is the Elmwood history expert, they'll be speaking next week. And then we have a fun penguin one coming up, and winter waterfowl, excuse me. So we have a lot coming up, and we're having fun. And my dog just joined me. And so I think that's time. I think he's hungry. So thank you, everyone. And
Yes.
looking forward to watching birds and having a lot of new ones to watch come as spring is coming. So
Yes. Yeah.
thanks again, Erin.
Thanks, Sarah.